Today we will tell you 6 stories from the Vietnam War that at first seem unbelievable, but actually happened. From strange disappearances and bizarre encounters to events that can't be explained, some of these stories have answers, but others remain a mystery even to this day. So let's begin. Number 1. The Laughing Soldiers. This incident was reported multiple times by US soldiers at different locations during the Vietnam War, and it still has no clear explanation. On several occasions, groups of US soldiers on patrol would suddenly hear movement in the bushes ahead of them. Expecting an ambush, they prepared for battle, only to be shocked by what happened next. Vietnamese soldiers carrying rifles on their backs and dressed in standard North Vietnamese army uniforms and gear appeared in front of them. However, instead of launching a typical attack, the Vietnamese soldiers stepped out of the bushes and started walking toward them. What shocked the American soldiers even more was that they didn't attack at all. Instead, they began laughing. Loud, uncontrollable, honest laughter that echoed through the jungle. They laughed and walked towards the US troops as if they didn't care about their lives or whether they would be shot. The US soldiers were completely confused and terrified. The enemy soldiers kept laughing and getting closer until the Americans, now in complete disbelief, finally opened fire. After a short but intense bursts of gunfire, the group of laughing soldiers was mowed down and the jungle fell silent again. This bizarre incident happened multiple times to different patrols, and no one knows why. Some say it was a distraction tactic aimed at destroying US morale, while others believe it was something paranormal. Either way, the laughing soldiers were seen by too many different people for it to be just a made-up scary story. Number 2. Real-life Tarzans. In 1972, the US dropped bombs on a Vietnamese village, killing many civilians. After losing his wife and 2 children, Ho Van Tran was last seen running into the jungle with his 2-year-old son. After that, they were never seen again. They were written off as missing and presumed dead in the attack. That was until 41 years later, when some wood gatherers ventured deeper into the jungle than usual and were shocked to find a small treehouse. Nearby, a man dressed in nothing but a vest made of woven plants calmly watched them. It was Ho Van Lang, now 43 years old man, who had been just 2 years old when he and his father fled into the jungle to escape the war. His father, now 85 years old, lay in the tree house in critical health, but still alive. Authorities were called, and the 2 men were taken to the hospital. For the first time in his life, Ho Van Lang saw other people and even learned that women existed, something he had never known. He knew only a few words and couldn't understand most of what was said to him. Father and son had spent over 4 decades in complete isolation, unaware of the world changing around them. But over time, they pieced together what had happened during the 4 decades these 2 men spent surviving in the jungle, believing the war was still ongoing. Much like some Japanese soldiers who remained hidden in jungles long after World War II ended, they stayed deep in the jungle, avoiding any contact with people. They hunted and lived off the jungle, enduring a tough life, eating whatever they could find. In their small wooden hut, a variety of tools, pans and pots made from parts of a downed American helicopter and bomb fragments were found. They kept a fire burning constantly for all those years, 24 hours a day, and somehow they managed to avoid any major health problems. Gradually, they were convinced that the war had ended and returned to the village. They slowly adjusted to their new lives and met family members who had long thought they were gone. Number 3. Operation Wandering Soul. This operation aimed to psychologically damage the enemy by exploiting a deep-rooted belief in Vietnamese culture that if a body wasn't properly buried, the soul of the deceased would be condemned to wander aimlessly in pain and suffering. Engineers created an eerie and disturbing audio tape called Ghost Tape Number 10. The recording sounded like the voice of a Vietnamese man's tormented spirit, lamenting his death and urging his comrades to surrender. Ghostly moans, eerie wails, and unsettling whispers were played through loudspeakers near US bases and off helicopters flying over enemy territory. The haunting voice and disturbing sounds echoed through the jungle, and reports from that time suggest that the tape sometimes had a powerful effect. Imagine being deep in the jungle at night, already hearing enough myths and superstitions about ghosts, and suddenly hearing the screams of a spirit along with strange, eerie noises. Some reports claim that entire Viet Cong camps would flee or surrender at the sound of these recordings. Other reports said that the tapes made it easier for the Viet Cong to locate and target American positions. The true impact of Operation Wandering Soul remains a mystery, but it's remembered as one of the most unusual and terrifying attempts to break the enemy's morale. Number 4. The disappearance of US airmen. Just 1 week after the US officially ended its involvement in the Vietnam War with the signing of the Paris Peace Accord, something horrible happened. Early that morning, despite the war officially being over, a United States Air Force EC-17 plane was shot down over Laos during a mission to monitor the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The plane was carrying 8 crew members, but after the crash, only 4 bodies were pulled from the wreckage. The other 4 members of the crew were missing without a trace. The families of the missing airmen were soon presented with unsettling evidence that raised more questions than answers. Although no bodies were found, the seats where the 4 men sat were unbuckled, suggesting they might have bailed out and survived the crash. Further fueling suspicion, a US listening post intercepted a message later that morning reporting the capture of 4 US airmen. Despite these clues, the US initially claimed the missing men had been killed in action. However, rumors swirled that something far more sinister had occurred. Some reports suggested that the missing airmen, who were technical specialists, may have been captured and taken to the Soviet Union. Given their expertise, they would have been valuable for intelligence purposes during the Cold War. Even today, this case remains under investigation, with no concrete answers about the fate of the 4 missing airmen, still leaving their families haunted by the thought of what really happened to them. Number 5. People of the Forest. Even before the war began, the Vietnamese people told stories of strange 6-foot-tall apes covered in thick brown or black hair, similar to humans, living deep in the jungle. However, these tales were mostly dismissed as folklore. Nevertheless, the locals avoided certain areas of the jungle at all costs. When the war started, unexplored regions were regularly patrolled by both sides, and soon strange reports began to emerge. Soldiers from various units described encounters with these creatures, which US GIs called rock apes. These creatures were not afraid of humans, and they would quietly observe patrols from a distance, usually moving around dusk or early in the morning. These sightings became impossible to ignore. Under intense pressure and in such harsh conditions, soldiers often mistook these creatures for the enemy and opened fire. In some cases, reports even stated that the creatures responded by hurling rocks at the US troops. What makes this story particularly intriguing is the sheer number of reported cases, which means it wasn't just one soldier imagining something in the stress of combat. The rock apes were seen by many. Number 6. The horrors of the final battle. In May 1975, the last official battle of the Vietnam War occurred when Khmer Rouge forces captured the US merchant ship SS Mayaguez. Even though the war had officially ended, this incident drew the US back into action. The names of those who died during this mission are the last ones engraved on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. However, what makes this story even more tragic is that some of the Marines from this mission were never found, and here's why. After the Khmer Rouge seized the ship, US Marines launched a counterattack to recapture it. The Marines successfully took back the Mayaguez, but they believed the crew had been taken to Koh Tang Island. This led to an invasion of the island, which turned out to be far more difficult than expected. The US forces faced heavy resistance from the Khmer Rouge fighters, and eventually the Marines had to be evacuated from the island. However, during the confusion and chaos of the fierce firefight, a machine gun team defending the right flank was somehow missed during the retreat and was left behind. By the time the mistake was realized, it was too late. Although radio contact was made with the team, recovering them was now nearly impossible. After that final radio communication, the team disappeared. Even enemy fighters were contacted to ask about the men, but no answers were given. Despite efforts to search for them, no trace of the men was ever found. Over a year later, they were officially declared missing in action and later presumed killed in action. What exactly happened to the machine gun team is still a mystery. Some witnesses claimed that the Marines were executed by the Khmer Rouge, but no bodies were ever recovered. Only small bone fragments were ever found, which were too small to provide conclusive answers. Tell us in the comments if you know more stories like these.